My grandmother was always called a witch by my in-laws. They laughed at her predictions and mocked her sharp intuition. But the day before my husband and I were supposed to leave for our luxurious anniversary trip, she grabbed my arm so hard her fingernails dug into my skin. Her eyes were wide, with a terror I had never seen before. "Do not go with him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You will not return alive. Before canceling, do exactly one thing. Check the new mortgage paperwork he made you sign last month. I am Gemma, 33 years old, and until that chilling moment, I believed I was married to the perfect man. Today, my husband is sitting in a federal prison, and his arrogant family has lost absolutely everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to trust your gut when everyone else called you crazy. My husband Declan was a prominent wealth manager in Seattle. He was charming, handsome, and carried a flawless facade that easily won over his elite clients. We lived in a stunning glass house overlooking the water, projecting the ultimate image of a successful modern couple. But while Declan dealt with high society and massive portfolios, I worked quietly in the background as a forensic accountant. I spent my days analyzing spreadsheets, tracking missing funds, and finding the truth hidden inside complex financial documents. I dealt in logic, numbers, and hard evidence. My mind was trained to spot irregularities that others overlooked. Yet I had somehow missed the giant red flags waving inside my own home. Declan and I were packing for our 5th anniversary trip to a remote cliffside villa in the Caribbean. He had planned everything down to the smallest detail, boasting about how secluded and private the location was. He said we needed a break from the noise of the city, a chance to disconnect completely. No cell service, no neighbors, just the two of us and the ocean. It sounded like a dream vacation to anyone else, but after my grandmother Irene delivered her warning, the idea of being completely isolated with Declan suddenly felt less like a romantic getaway and more like a carefully constructed trap. Irene was 80 years old, a sharp and intuitive woman who had raised me after my parents passed away. She was not a wealthy woman, which made her an easy target for Declan's family. My mother-in-law Beverly and my sister-in-law Sloane constantly rolled their eyes at Irene, calling her a crazy old bat behind her back. They looked down on her simple lifestyle and dismissed her gut feelings as absolute nonsense. But Irene had never been wrong about people, and when she told me to look at the mortgage paperwork, my forensic accounting instincts immediately flared to life. A month ago, Declan had come to me with a thick stack of documents. He said he was restructuring our home loan to get a significantly better interest rate. He was rushing, claiming he had an important client meeting in 20 minutes, and he just needed my quick signatures on the final pages. I was in the middle of a major audit for work, my desk covered in files, so I trusted my husband and signed exactly where he pointed. I had not read the fine print. For an auditor, it was a shameful mistake. But you do not typically audit the man you sleep next to every single night. Now staring at my half-packed suitcase, my heart began to pound, a heavy, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I tried to push the rising paranoia away. Declan was downstairs in his home office, humming a cheerful tune while he organized his travel documents. He was the man who brought me coffee in bed every morning, the man who remembered the exact date of our first kiss, the man who had built a supposedly perfect life for us. How could he possibly want to harm me? But the seed of doubt had been planted, and my professional training took over. In my line of work, numbers do not lie, and paper trails always lead to the cold truth. If there was nothing to hide, the paperwork would prove his innocence. I needed to see those documents immediately. But Declan guarded his home office like a heavily armed fortress. He kept all his critical files inside a vintage leather briefcase, locked with a custom combination dial. He never let it out of his sight, claiming it contained highly sensitive client information, protected by strict confidentiality agreements. Asking to see the mortgage papers now, just hours before our flight, would immediately raise his suspicions. If Irene was right, and if he really had sinister intentions, alerting him to my doubts could put me in immediate physical danger. I had to be smart. I had to be completely invisible. I spent the rest of the evening playing the role of the perfectly excited wife. I folded my bright sundresses, organized my travel toiletries, and smiled brightly whenever Declan walked into the room. We ate dinner together, sharing a bottle of expensive red wine to celebrate the upcoming trip. I forced myself to laugh at his jokes, to maintain steady eye contact, to act completely normal, while my mind raced with terrible possibilities. The anticipation was agonizing, every tick of the clock amplifying my hidden anxiety. When we finally went to bed, I lay perfectly still in the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. I waited for what felt like an eternity. I needed to be absolutely certain he was in a deep sleep. I watched the digital clock on my nightstand slowly change its glowing numbers. Midnight. 1 in the morning. Finally, the clock struck 2 a.m. I carefully slipped out from under the heavy duvet, testing my weight on the floorboards to avoid any sudden creaks. Declan shifted slightly, mumbling in his sleep, and I froze, holding my breath until he settled back into a deep rhythm. Moving like a shadow, I crept out of the bedroom and silently made my way downstairs toward his home office. The house was pitch black and freezing cold, but my palms were sweating. I reached his desk, my trembling fingers finding the cold metal clasps of his locked leather briefcase. I knew the combination to the lock by heart. It was his mother's birthday, a detail that perfectly encapsulated the suffocating dynamic of my marriage. I slowly rotated the small brass dials, listening for the faint click in the dead silence of the office. Beverly Harrison and Sloane, the holy trinity of Declan's world. His parents and his younger sister operated like an exclusive country club that I was never quite wealthy enough or interesting enough to officially join. To them, Declan was the undisputed golden boy, the financial prodigy who could do no wrong. They treated him like royalty, constantly praising his lavish lifestyle and his elite clientele. Meanwhile, my career as a forensic accountant was a frequent target for their condescending jokes. At family dinners, Beverly would wave her manicured hand and dismiss my work entirely, loudly lamenting how her brilliant son had married a woman content with a boring spreadsheet life. Harrison would chuckle, puffing on his imported cigars, while Sloane would make snide comments about my sensible clothes. But what angered me most was how they treated my grandmother, Irene. Whenever Irene visited, she would quietly observe their arrogant displays of wealth. Sloane would openly roll her eyes, whispering to Declan that he needed to keep that crazy old bat away from their high society friends. Declan always promised me he would defend us, but he never actually did. He simply smiled his perfect smile and told me to be the bigger person. Now, as the brass lock finally clicked open, I realized that perfect smile was nothing but a mask. I lifted the heavy leather flap of the briefcase, clicking on a small pen light I had grabbed from the kitchen drawer. The narrow beam of light illuminated neatly organized stacks of manila folders. I sifted through them carefully, making sure to memorize exactly how they were arranged. I bypassed the confidential client portfolios and the quarterly earnings reports. I was looking for the personal files, the stack of documents Declan had aggressively shuffled in front of me a month ago. I found a thick folder tucked into a zippered compartment at the very back. It lacked a proper label, which immediately triggered my professional instincts. People who manage money for a living never leave important files unlabeled, unless they want them to remain invisible. I pulled the folder out, resting it on the polished mahogany desk, and opened the cover. My forensic accounting brain shifted into high gear the moment the penlight swept across the first page. I did not just read the words. I analyzed the structure, the terminology, and the binding clauses. Declan had told me this was a standard mortgage refinance agreement to secure a better interest rate on our glass house, but the paperwork sitting in front of me had absolutely nothing to do with real estate. There were no property appraisal clauses, no amortization schedules, and no escrow agreements. Instead, I was staring at a highly customized, accelerated term life insurance policy. And I was the sole insured party. My breath caught in my throat. I forced my eyes to scan the dense legal jargon, dissecting the clauses with the cold, calculating precision I used every day at work. Declan had hidden the true nature of this document beneath layers of complex financial language, banking on the fact that I would be too busy and too trusting to read the fine print. He had specifically chosen pages for me to sign that looked like standard disclosure forms. But pieced together in this folder, the horrifying truth was undeniable. This policy was designed to pay out quickly and unconditionally upon my death. It even included specific riders that expedited the payout process in the event of accidental death while traveling internationally. The Caribbean trip, the remote cliffside villa, the secluded location with zero cell service. My hands began to shake violently, the penlight casting erratic shadows across the walls of the dark office. Irene was right. The crazy old bat they all mocked had seen straight through the golden boy. I flipped to the declaration page to check the financial stakes. In my line of work, motive is always tied to a specific number. You just have to find how big that number is. I dragged the beam of light down to the coverage amount. My blood turned to actual ice. $5 million. Declan had placed a $5 million bounty on my head. I stared at the bold black ink, feeling a wave of intense nausea wash over me. I had to grip the edge of the mahogany desk to keep my knees from buckling. My husband, the man sleeping soundly just one floor above me, was planning to end my life in a matter of hours for a massive payday. But the forensic auditor in me could not stop there. $5 million was a staggering amount of money, but direct payouts to a spouse often trigger immediate red flags with insurance investigators and local law enforcement, especially in the event of a sudden tragic accident on a remote island. Declan was a wealth manager. He knew exactly how financial crimes were investigated. He was far too smart to list himself directly as the primary beneficiary. I swiftly turned to the final page of the policy, searching for the beneficiary designation. If Declan was not the direct recipient, the money had to be funneled somewhere else, somewhere completely insulated from a police investigation. I found the line item. The sole beneficiary of my $5 million life insurance policy was an entity called the Horizon Harbor Trust. I stared at the name, my mind racing to process the information. Horizon Harbor Trust. It was a newly established, obscure trust fund. It was a financial ghost ship, a classic evasion tactic used by the wealthy to hide vast amounts of capital from tax authorities and legal scrutiny. By naming a trust as the beneficiary, the insurance company would legally be required to pay the entity, not the individual. The money would vanish behind an impenetrable wall of corporate privacy laws. Declan had engineered the perfect, untraceable murder-for-hire plot. I was worth $5 million dead, and the money was set to flow straight into a phantom account. I memorized the name of the entity, burning every letter of Horizon Harbor Trust into my brain. As a forensic accountant, I knew that trusts did not simply exist in a vacuum. They required a registered agent, a physical mailing address, and a paper trail filed with the state. I carefully placed the life insurance folder back into the leather briefcase, ensuring it sat at the exact same angle I had found it. I closed the heavy flap and spun the brass dials back to Beverly's birthday, listening for the faint click that sealed the evidence away. I needed to move fast. I pulled my encrypted work laptop from my own tote bag, booted it up, and connected to my secure mobile hotspot. I could not risk Declan's home network logging my search history. The glow of the screen illuminated my trembling hands. I accessed the Secretary of State business database, typing the trust name into the public registry search bar. Wealth managers like Declan were arrogant. They often believed their financial structures were too complex for ordinary people to unravel, but they always underestimated the sheer persistence of an auditor looking for a thread to pull. The search results loaded instantly. Horizon Harbor Trust had been registered exactly 6 weeks ago, precisely around the time Declan had started suggesting we take a romantic anniversary trip to the Caribbean. The timeline was a perfect, terrifying match. I clicked on the filing documents to view the original registration certificate. Trusts are designed to mask the true identities of their beneficiaries, but they still require a legally responsible party to handle the official paperwork. I scanned the digital document for the registered agent. The name listed was a generic corporate services company, a standard dead end used to hide assets. But I knew how to dig deeper. I cross-referenced the corporate services company with property tax records, looking for the specific mailing address attached to the annual filing fee. The address populated on my screen. It was a luxury high-rise condominium complex in downtown Seattle. My blood ran cold. I did not need to run a reverse property search to know who lived at that address. I had helped Declan move his younger sister into that exact building 3 years ago. The registered agent controlling the Horizon Harbor Trust was Sloan. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. This was not just Declan acting alone as a greedy, desperate husband. This was a coordinated, premeditated family conspiracy. Sloan, the sister who constantly mocked my sensible clothes, was the designated trustee, waiting to collect $5 million upon my violent death. And if Sloan was involved, it meant Beverly and Harrison were almost certainly part of the scheme. The entire family, the arrogant, wealthy in-laws who had always treated me like an unwanted outsider, were actively planning my execution. They were counting down the days until they could cash in on my corpse. Pure, unadulterated panic ripped through my nervous system. I shoved my laptop back into my bag, and my heart hammering violently against my ribs. Suddenly, every single detail about our upcoming anniversary trip took on a sinister, lethal meaning. Declan had insisted on booking a remote cliffside villa. He had bragged to our friends about how the location was entirely off the grid, boasting that the property had absolutely no internet access and zero cell reception. He had painted it as a romantic escape from the modern world. I now realized it was an isolated slaughterhouse. Irene was right. My grandmother, the woman they all dismissed as a crazy old bat, had seen the truth radiating off my husband. Her desperate whisper echoed in the dark, silent office. "Do not go with him. You will not return alive." If I got on that plane tomorrow, I would never come back. Declan would hike with me up to the jagged cliffs overlooking the ocean, wait until we were entirely alone, and push me to my death. He would play the devastated, grieving widower for the local island authorities. He would claim I lost my footing while taking a photograph. The local police, lacking resources and eager to avoid a messy international incident, would quickly rule it a tragic accident. The insurance company would expedite the $5 million payout directly to Sloan, and the Golden family would be richer than ever. I collapsed against the side of the mahogany desk, fighting the overwhelming urge to hyperventilate. The walls of the office felt like they were closing in to crush me. I needed to run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to sprint out the front door, hail a taxi in the middle of the night, and disappear into the safety of a police station. But my forensic training forced my panic into submission. Declan was best friends with the local police chief. If I showed up in the middle of the night, rambling about a trust fund and a life insurance policy, they would call my husband to pick me up. Declan would tell them I was having a mental breakdown. He would bring me back to this glass house, and I would never be seen again. I had to abort this trip without giving him the slightest reason to suspect I knew the truth. I had to maintain the illusion of the naive, trusting wife. If his mask slipped, mine had to stay perfectly glued in place. I stood up on shaking legs, smoothing down my pajamas, and forced myself to breathe evenly. I erased every trace of my presence in the office, wiping the desk surface with my sleeve and checking the carpet for any dropped items. I crept back up the hardwood stairs, my bare feet completely silent. I slipped under the heavy duvet just as the digital clock shifted to 4 in the morning. Declan was still snoring softly beside me, a man sleeping with the peaceful conscience of a predator. I lay completely paralyzed in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind calculating a survival strategy. I could not sleep. I listened to the wind outside the glass house, waiting for the inevitable dawn. Morning broke with pale gray light filtering through the expensive curtains. I heard Declan stir, stretch, and get out of bed with a cheerful sigh. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to be asleep, as he walked into the master bathroom and turned on the shower. I listened to the water running, terrified of the man washing himself just feet away from me. 10 minutes later, the bedroom door clicked open. I opened my eyes and sat up, forcing a sleepy, innocent expression onto my face. Declan walked into the room dressed in crisp traveling clothes, smelling of expensive cologne. He was smiling perfectly, the charming, flawless grin that had fooled me for 5 years. In his hands, he held 2 steaming cups of coffee. He walked over to my side of the bed and handed me a mug, kissing my forehead gently. "Drink up, beautiful," he said, his voice smooth and filled with fake excitement. "The airport taxi arrives in exactly 3 hours. We have a flight to catch." I stared at the steaming mug in his hand. My stomach churned, but I forced my facial muscles to arrange themselves into an expression of bright anticipation. I reached out my fingers, brushing against his knuckles, and took the coffee. "Thank you," I murmured, keeping my voice soft and even. I took a small sip, letting the bitter liquid burn the back of my throat. Declan beamed, patting my shoulder before turning to head back down the hallway to fetch the last of our luggage. The second his footsteps faded, I set the mug down on the nightstand. I had to execute my exit strategy immediately. It had to be messy, physical, and entirely undeniable. An ordinary headache or a sudden fever would not be enough to stop a man who had a $5 million deadline hanging over his head. I needed a sudden, severe illness to ground me in Seattle. I rushed into the master bathroom and locked the door, leaning heavily over the porcelain sink. My heart was thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I shoved 2 fingers deep down the back of my throat. My body rebelled instantly. The physical reaction, combined with the sheer terror coursing through my veins, made the process violently effective. I retched hard, coughing and gasping as the remnants of last night's dinner and the morning coffee splashed into the sink. I forced myself to do it again, ensuring my face was flushed, my eyes were bloodshot, and sweat beaded heavily across my forehead. I needed to look genuinely, desperately ill to a man who wanted to kill me. I turned on the faucet, splashing cold water against my pale cheeks, just as a heavy knock sounded at the bathroom door. Gemma Declan called out, his voice laced with sudden urgency. "Are you all right in there?" I groaned loudly, leaning against the doorframe as I unlocked it. I stumbled out, clutching my stomach, letting my knees buckle slightly. Declan caught me by the arms, but his grip was uncomfortably tight. His fingers dug into my biceps, entirely lacking the gentle touch of a concerned husband. I looked up at him, letting tears of genuine fear pool in my eyes, though he would interpret them as tears of physical pain. "I am so sick," I gasped, leaning my weight against his chest. "I must have eaten something terrible yesterday. My stomach is in absolute knots." Declan guided me down the stairs and into the kitchen, sitting me down on one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. The morning light filtering through the glass walls highlighted the sudden tension tightening his jaw. He poured a glass of water and set it sharply on the marble counter. "You just have travel anxiety," he said dismissively. "Drink this, take a motion sickness pill. You will feel perfectly fine once we are in the air." I gripped the glass, my hands shaking violently. "No, Declan," I whispered, leaning over the counter and clutching my abdomen. "I cannot fly today. I am physically unable to get on an airplane. We have to cancel the trip." The silence that followed was absolute. The charming, loving facade of the Golden Boy wealth manager did not just slip away. It shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of my eyes. I watched the micro-expressions ripple across his face. The initial confusion morphed instantly into pure, unadulterated panic, and then crystallized into a blinding, predatory rage. Declan was not looking at a sick wife. He was looking at a $5 million payout slipping through his fingers. He was looking at a federal audit that was going to expose his massive embezzlement scheme in a matter of days. He needed me on that remote island. He needed me dead. The realization that his perfect execution plan was failing made him snap. Without a single word of warning, Declan picked up his ceramic coffee mug from the counter and hurled it violently across the room. It smashed against the pristine white kitchen wall with a deafening crack. Shards of porcelain exploded in every direction, showering the hardwood floor. Hot, dark coffee splattered across the paint, dripping down the wall like dirty blood. I flinched hard, raising my arms to shield my face, a genuine scream tearing from my throat. "You are ruining everything," Declan roared, his voice echoing brutally through the high ceilings of our modern home. The veins in his neck bulged, his face turning a dark mottled red. He slammed his fists down on the marble island, leaning across the counter until his face was inches from mine. "I planned this entire trip for us. I spent months putting this together, and you are going to ruin it because your stomach hurts. You are weak, Gemma. You have always been weak and pathetic." He was spitting the words at me, raining down a torrent of verbal abuse that left me paralyzed. I had been with this man for 5 years, and I had never seen this terrifying, aggressive monster lurking beneath his tailored suits. He paced back and forth across the kitchen, kicking a stray piece of broken porcelain across the room. "You are getting on that plane," he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You are going to pack your things, get in the taxi, and we are going to the Caribbean. I will not let you ruin my life." I cowered on the bar stool, wrapping my arms around myself, playing the role of the terrified, submissive victim. I sobbed loudly, apologizing over and over, burying my face in my hands. Declan stood over me, his chest heaving as he stared down with eyes completely devoid of human empathy. He let out a loud, frustrated scream, kicking the base of the kitchen island before turning on his heel. "I need to make a phone call," he barked, his voice cold and menacing. "Do not move." He stormed out of the kitchen, his heavy footsteps echoing as he marched toward the attached garage, slamming the heavy fire door behind him. The moment the latch clicked into place, my tears instantly vanished. My analytical mind snapped back into absolute focus. I could not stay in this house. He was unstable, desperate, and running out of time. I had a 2-minute window to escape while he was distracted in the garage. I bolted out of my chair, ignoring the broken glass on the floor, and sprinted silently down the long hallway toward the front entrance. My coat and purse were hanging in the hall closet, exactly where I had left them last night. I threw open the closet door, plunging my hand deep into my leather handbag to grab my car keys, my wallet, and my cell phone. I was going to run straight to my car and drive away before he even realized I was gone. My hand blindly searched the bottom of the bag, sweeping back and forth across the smooth interior lining. My breath caught in my throat. I yanked the bag open, staring down into the dark, empty space. There were no car keys. There was no wallet. There was no passport. My purse had been completely emptied. I frantically dug my hands deeper into the silk lining of my bag, praying my fingers would brush against the familiar leather of my wallet or the sharp metal edges of my car keys. Nothing. The compartment was completely bare. He had not just snapped in a moment of frustrated rage. He had methodically stripped me of every single resource I needed to escape. He took my financial access, my identification, and my mobility before he even handed me that cup of coffee. The heavy fire door connecting the garage to the hallway suddenly swung open. I jumped back from the closet, my breath hitching in my throat. Declan stepped into the house. The explosive, red-faced monster from the kitchen had completely vanished. In his place stood a man possessed by a chilling, calculated calmness. He casually adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt and looked at me, standing frozen by the open closet. His eyes dropped to my empty handbag, resting on the floor, and a slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice smooth and devoid of any emotion. I backed away, my bare feet sliding against the cold hardwood floor. "I was just looking for my phone," I lied, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "I wanted to call the doctor to see if they could prescribe me some anti-nausea medication." Declan did not blink. He walked slowly toward the front entrance of our glass house. I watched in absolute horror as he reached out and slid the heavy brass deadbolt across the door. The metallic click echoed through the silent hallway like a gunshot. He then engaged the secondary security chain, securing us inside. He turned back to me, his posture relaxed, as if he had just performed a mundane household chore. "You do not need a doctor, Gemma," he said gently. "You just need to sleep off whatever is upsetting your stomach. I have already contacted the airline and the villa management. I pushed our flights back by 24 hours. We leave tomorrow morning instead. Go back to bed and rest." I stared at him, the reality of my situation crashing down on me with the weight of a collapsing building. I was no longer a wife recovering from an illness. I was a hostage. This beautiful million-dollar house, with its panoramic views of the Seattle skyline, had officially become my prison. Declan was not going to let me out of his sight. He had secured the perimeter and neutralized my ability to run. I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor to hide the sheer terror threatening to consume me. "Okay," I whispered, wrapping my arms tightly around my waist. "I will go upstairs and lie down." I turned and walked up the staircase, forcing myself to move at a normal, sluggish pace. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to smash a window, to scream for help. But the house was heavily insulated, set back from the street, and Declan was physically stronger than me. If I made a run for the glass doors, he would tackle me before I even reached the patio. I had to survive by using my intellect, not my physical strength. I reached the master bedroom and closed the door behind me, leaning against the solid wood frame. I pulled my cell phone from my pajama pocket. It was the only thing he had not taken from my purse, likely because he wanted to monitor my communications. My hands shook as I unlocked the screen and opened my contacts, desperately looking for the local police dispatch number. But as my thumb hovered over the dial button, I noticed the top left corner of the screen. No service. I stared at the letters, my mind racing. I toggled the airplane mode on and off. Nothing changed. I tried to connect to our home network, but my phone immediately displayed an error message. The wireless password had been changed. I was completely severed from the outside world. The bedroom door handle turned slowly. Declan pushed the door open, carrying a fresh glass of water and a small white pill. He walked over to the nightstand, setting them down with deliberate care. He looked down at me sitting on the edge of the bed, his eyes dropping to the useless smartphone gripped tightly in my hand. "I noticed your wallet was missing from your purse this morning," he said, his tone dripping with fake concern. You must have dropped it yesterday when you were out running errands. Since your credit cards and identification were inside, I went ahead and called the bank to freeze your accounts. I also contacted the cellular provider and suspended your phone line. We cannot risk any identity theft. It is just standard fraud protection, sweetheart. The sheer audacity of his lie left me breathless. He was gaslighting me with flawless precision, painting his calculated imprisonment as the actions of a protective, loving husband. He was ensuring that if I somehow managed to slip away, I would have no money, no identity, and no way to call for help. "Thank you," I managed to say, forcing a weak, grateful smile. "That was very thoughtful of you." "Take your medicine, Gemma," he commanded softly, pointing to the white pill. "Get some sleep. I will be working in my office, right downstairs, if you need anything." I watched him leave the room, listening to his footsteps recede down the staircase. The moment I was alone, I grabbed the white pill and shoved it deep into the soil of the large potted fern sitting near the window. I had no idea what he had actually given me, but I was not going to let him drug me into submission. I sat on the floor, pressing my back against the wall, my forensic mind mapping out my rapidly shrinking options. I could not use the landline because it was located in his office. I could not use my smartphone because he had deactivated the access card and locked me out of the wireless network. I was trapped in a digital black hole. I closed my eyes, fighting a rising tide of despair. I needed a device that was not connected to my cellular plan. I needed something that could bypass his new network password. My eyes snapped open as a sudden memory sparked in my brain. 3 years ago, my brother Leo had given me a bulky first-generation tablet for my birthday. I had used it exclusively to read digital books, review massive audit spreadsheets away from my desk, and watch cooking videos. When the screen cracked a few months later, I had tossed it into the bottom of my laundry basket in the master closet, completely forgetting about it. Because it was an older model, I had set it up to automatically connect to any unsecured network in the vicinity, relying on the weak, unencrypted wireless signal from the elderly couple living in the house next door. If that old tablet still had even a fraction of battery life, and if our neighbors still had not bothered to put a password on their router, I had a lifeline. I crawled silently across the bedroom floor, heading straight for the dark walk-in closet. I plunged my hands into the depths of the woven laundry hamper. The smell of Declan's expensive cologne lingered on discarded shirts, a sickening reminder of the man I had slept next to for 5 years. I tossed aside tangled sweaters and damp towels, my nails scraping against the wicker bottom. My heart hammered a frantic, deafening rhythm against my ribcage. "Please," I begged silently in the dark, "please let it be here." My fingertips brushed against cold, hard glass. I grabbed the heavy rectangular device and pulled it free from the fabric. It was the old tablet Leo had given me. The screen was severely spiderwebbed, with jagged cracks from where I had dropped it months ago, but the home button was intact. I pressed my thumb hard against the power button. For 5 agonizing seconds, the screen remained pitch black. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to any force that would listen. A faint, glowing white logo suddenly illuminated the dark confines of the closet. I immediately jammed my finger against the volume down button, holding it tight to ensure the startup chime would not echo into the hallway. The home screen booted up, casting a pale, bluish light across my flushed face. I glanced at the top right corner. The battery icon glowed a menacing red. 11%. It was a fragile, fleeting lifeline, but it was all I had. I knew I could not stay in the closet. Declan had acute hearing, and the dead silence of the second floor would amplify any digital clicks or rustling. I needed a distraction, an auditory shield that would give me complete privacy. I crept out of the closet and moved swiftly into the master bathroom. I pushed the heavy oak door shut and slid the thick metal lock into place with a quiet, satisfying click. I stepped over to the sprawling glass shower stall and turned the chrome handle all the way to hot. The water blasted from the rainfall showerhead, crashing against the marble tiles with a deafening, continuous roar. The sound filled the room instantly, creating a thick, impenetrable wall of white noise. Steam began to rise from the floor, swirling through the air and fogging the large vanity mirrors. The heat quickly turned oppressive, but the rushing water isolated me entirely from whatever Declan was doing downstairs. If he crept up the stairs to check on me, he would only hear a wife taking a long, soothing shower to ease her stomach pain. I sank onto the cold tile floor, wedging my back firmly against the locked door. I rested the cracked tablet on my knees and opened the network settings. A list of locked wireless connections populated the screen. Declan had recently renamed our home network to a random string of numbers and letters, a security measure he claimed was necessary for his high-profile wealth management job. I waited, holding my breath, watching the small loading wheel spin on the screen. I needed the neighbor's network to appear. The elderly couple next door were entirely unbothered by technology, and I prayed they had not updated their router. Finally, a generic default network name popped up at the bottom of the list. I tapped it. The screen froze for a terrifying moment. "Connect," I commanded it silently in my head. The tablet hesitated, processing the weak signal traveling through the insulated walls of our expensive glass house. A small blue checkmark appeared next to the name. I was online. I bypassed the standard text messaging applications. If Declan had installed tracking spyware on our accounts, sending a normal message would trigger an alert on his phone immediately. Instead, I opened a secure, heavily encrypted communication app that I strictly used for confidential forensic accounting audits. I navigated to my contacts list and selected Nia. Nia was my brother Leo's wife, a fiercely intelligent, formidable African-American woman who ran her own elite cybersecurity firm. She dealt with corporate espionage, high-level data breaches, and tracking digital ghosts across the dark web. While Declan and his arrogant, bankrupt family constantly looked down on her, viewing Nia and Leo as working-class annoyances who did not fit their elite aesthetic. Nia possessed a technical genius that none of them could ever comprehend. She could bypass corporate firewalls, trace hidden offshore accounts, and resurrect deleted financial files with brutal efficiency. We shared a deep, unspoken respect for one another. She was the sister I had actually chosen, unlike the toxic in-laws who were currently counting down the hours until my death. If anyone could tear down Declan's flawless financial facade and secure the hard evidence I needed to survive this nightmare, it was her. My fingers flew across the shattered glass keyboard. I kept the message entirely clinical and devoid of panic. As an auditor, I knew that panic wasted precious time. I needed her to understand the absolute severity of the situation immediately. I typed out the terrifying truth. Declan is trying to kill me for a $5 million life insurance payout. I am locked inside the house. He took my passport and my keys. I need proof of his financial crimes. I hit send. A single gray checkmark appeared next to the text bubble, indicating the message had successfully left my device. I stared at the screen, watching the battery drop from 11% to 10%. The steam in the bathroom was growing dense and suffocating, making my clothes stick uncomfortably to my skin. The roaring waterfall of the shower masked everything, leaving me completely blind to any movements outside the door. Was he standing right on the other side? Was he listening to the water? Was he holding a weapon? A second gray checkmark appeared. Delivered. A fraction of a second later, the checkmarks turned solid blue. Red. I gripped the edges of the tablet so hard, my knuckles turned stark white. 3 animated dots bounced at the bottom of the screen. Nia was typing. She did not ask if I was making a sick joke. She did not waste time demanding a lengthy explanation or expressing shock. Nia was a cold-blooded professional who understood that in a crisis, verification always comes after survival. Her response materialized on the cracked screen, a beacon of hope in the suffocating, steamy darkness of my bathroom prison. I am already hacking into his digital footprint. Give me exactly 10 minutes. Do whatever it takes to stay alive until then. I stared at the glowing blue text on the cracked screen. 10 minutes. 600 seconds. That was the exact margin between my survival and my execution. I pressed the power button, plunging the bathroom back into darkness, and shoved the dying tablet deep into the center of a folded bath towel on the bottom shelf of the vanity. I could not risk the screen lighting up with a notification while I was out of the room. I stood up, my legs trembling so violently I had to grip the marble countertop to steady myself. I reached over and shut off the shower. The sudden silence in the room was deafening, ringing in my ears, like an air raid siren. I quickly stripped off my damp, sweat-soaked pajamas and wrapped myself in a thick, dry robe. I stared at my reflection in the fogged mirror, wiping away a patch of condensation to meet my own terrified eyes. I had to bury the panic. I had to completely suppress the forensic accountant who had just uncovered a $5 million murder plot. I needed to resurrect the naive, adoring wife that Declan thought he had married. If he saw even a single flicker of suspicion in my eyes, he would realize I knew his secret. And if he realized I knew, those 600 seconds would be cut brutally short. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped out into the hallway. The house was unnervingly quiet. I walked slowly down the hardwood stairs, keeping my head slightly bowed, my posture deliberately submissive and small. I found Declan in the living room. He was standing by the massive glass windows, staring out at the manicured front lawn, his posture rigid and tense. When he heard my footsteps, he turned around. The explosive anger from the kitchen was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness that was somehow even more terrifying. I forced my facial muscles to relax, letting a look of profound guilt and shame wash over my features. I walked directly toward him, wrapping my arms around my waist in a defensive, apologetic gesture. "Declan," I whispered, keeping my voice trembling and weak. "I am so incredibly sorry. I did not mean to yell or ruin our morning. I was just in so much pain and I panicked. I think the food poisoning triggered a severe anxiety attack." He did not say a word. He just stood there, towering over me, his pale blue eyes searching my face for any sign of deception. I forced myself to take the final 2 steps, closing the distance between us. I reached out with shaking hands and rested my palms flat against his chest. Beneath the expensive fabric of his tailored shirt, I could feel his heart beating at a slow, steady rhythm. It was the calm, controlled heartbeat of a man who felt absolutely no remorse for what he was planning to do. I pressed my cheek against his chest, enduring the suffocating wave of physical revulsion that threatened to make me gag. "I ruined our plans," I murmured softly, letting a single tear slip down my cheek to stain his shirt. "You planned such a beautiful trip for our anniversary, and I threw a tantrum because I could not handle a stomach bug. Please forgive me." For a terrifying moment, he remained completely rigid. Then I felt his heavy hands settle onto my shoulders. He let out a long, exaggerated sigh. The golden boy mask slid perfectly back into place. His hands moved up his fingers, gently threading through my damp hair. He stroked my head with a slow, rhythmic motion that made my skin crawl. "It is all right, Gemma," he said, his voice dropping an octave to that smooth, comforting tone he used to manipulate his wealthy clients. "I overreacted too. I have just been under an immense amount of pressure at the wealth management firm. The market has been volatile, and I wanted to treat you to something special. I just want you to be healthy and happy." The psychological tension was absolute agony. He was holding me in a gentle embrace, playing the role of the devoted protector, completely unaware that I had just deciphered his offshore corporate trust structure. Every time his hand stroked the back of my neck, I visualized him pushing me off a jagged cliff in the Caribbean. "Let me make it up to you," I offered quickly, pulling back just enough to look up at him with wide, apologetic eyes. "I am starting to feel a little bit better. Let me make you lunch. I can make those roasted turkey sandwiches you love. It is the least I can do after acting so dramatic." Declan smiled, a genuine-looking warm expression that made my stomach churn with fresh horror. "That sounds perfect, sweetheart," he replied, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss against my forehead. I walked into the kitchen. Declan had already swept up the shattered porcelain from his coffee mug, erasing all evidence of his violent outburst. I moved to the refrigerator, pulling out ingredients with deliberate, steady movements. Declan pulled out a bar stool and sat at the kitchen island, resting his forearms on the marble counter. He watched me intently. I could feel his gaze burning into my back as I sliced bread and arranged cold cuts. The sensation of being observed by a predator was suffocating. He was analyzing my every movement, waiting for a slip-up, watching his $5 million investment slice tomatoes. I kept up a steady stream of meaningless chatter to fill the silence. I talked about my plans to organize the pantry this weekend, about a new novel I wanted to read on the flight tomorrow, about everything and anything that would convince him my mind was entirely focused on mundane, domestic tasks. I was putting on the performance of a lifetime, fighting the overwhelming urge to grip the heavy chef knife in my hand and plunge it directly into his chest to save my own life. I placed the sandwich on a ceramic plate and slid it across the marble island toward him. Just as his fingers closed around the edge of the plate, the sharp, jarring ringtone of his cell phone echoed through the kitchen. Declan pulled the phone from his pocket. I saw the caller ID flash brightly across the screen. It was Beverly, his mother, the woman who was actively helping him plan my demise. Declan's expression tightened slightly. He glanced at me, then looked back at the phone. "I need to take this," he said smoothly, sliding off the bar stool. "It is a major client, dealing with a time zone difference. I will be right back." He turned and walked toward the enclosed glass patio off the living room. The heavy deadbolt on the front door was still securely locked, keeping me trapped inside the house, but the heavy glass patio doors slid shut behind him, sealing him in a soundproof box. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched him put the phone to his ear and begin pacing back and forth, entirely engrossed in the conversation with his conspirator. This was my window. My 10 minutes were up. I dropped the chef knife onto the cutting board and sprinted silently out of the kitchen. I flew up the hardwood staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time, ignoring the burning ache in my thighs. I rushed back into the master bathroom, dropping to my knees on the cold tile. I ripped the folded bath towel away and grabbed the cracked tablet. I jammed my thumb against the home button. The screen illuminated, casting a harsh blue glow across the dark bathroom. The battery icon was flashing a critical red warning. I had exactly 3% battery life remaining. I opened the encrypted communication application. A new notification badge rested over Nia's name. I tapped the message thread, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm in my ears. Nia had not sent another text message. Instead, resting at the bottom of the screen was a massive, heavily encrypted data file waiting to be downloaded. I tapped the download icon, watching the thin blue progress bar inch across the cracked screen. The battery dropped to 2%. My chest tightened with every agonizing second it took for the massive file to transfer over the weak wireless connection. Finally, the screen flashed green, and the encrypted folder unzipped itself into dozens of heavily secured financial spreadsheets, offshore bank statements, and private client ledgers. Nia had completely bypassed the security firewalls of Declan's prestigious wealth management firm. She had pulled his entire digital footprint, dragging his darkest secrets into the light. I opened the master ledger first. My eyes darted across the columns and rows, my brain automatically switching into its natural forensic accounting mode. For the past 5 years, Declan had convinced everyone, including me, that he was a financial genius. He managed portfolios for Seattle's most elite tech executives, surgeons, and real estate developers. He brought in staggering returns, securing his position as the ultimate golden boy. But as I scrolled through the raw, unfiltered data of his offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and the Isle of Man, the brilliant illusion evaporated. The money trail was an absolute catastrophe. There were no brilliant stock market investments. There were no high-yield real estate acquisitions. There were no secure treasury bonds. Declan was not a successful wealth manager. He was running a massive, catastrophic Ponzi scheme. My trained eyes easily tracked the fraudulent flow of capital. Whenever a new wealthy client deposited funds into the firm, Declan immediately siphoned off a massive percentage. He used the stolen capital from the new clients to pay the promised returns to his older clients, creating a continuous, desperate cycle of fake profitability. He was shifting phantom money between shell corporations to hide the massive bleeding gaps in his balance sheets. But he was not just using the money to keep the scheme alive. He was bleeding the accounts dry to fund the arrogant, extravagant lifestyle of his entire toxic family. I opened a secondary spreadsheet, labeled with a cryptic string of letters, recognizing the initials of his parents and sister. The sheer volume of embezzled funds flowing directly into their pockets was staggering. I tracked a wire transfer of $400,000 originating from a retired surgeon's retirement portfolio, routed through a dummy corporation, and deposited straight into Harrison's private checking account to cover his mounting gambling debts. He had systematically drained the savings of hard-working families to feed his father's reckless addiction to high-stakes poker games across the city. I found another ledger showing weekly withdrawals disguised as consulting fees. These funds were being used to pay Beverly's exorbitant country club dues, her luxury vehicle leases, and her endless designer shopping sprees. She was parading around Seattle society draped in stolen wealth, completely oblivious or dangerously indifferent to the fact that her luxurious lifestyle was directly funded by the theft of innocent people's entire livelihoods. Sloane was not left out either. The luxury downtown condominium she lived in, the exact address registered to the Horizon Harbor Trust, had been purchased entirely in cash, using money stolen from a tech CEO's children's college fund. The entire family was a financial parasite feasting on the life savings of innocent people. They looked down on me for working a sensible job, mocking my quiet career, while they funded their elite, snobbish existence entirely with stolen money. They were bankrupt, morally and financially. Without a constant influx of new client money, their entire world would collapse overnight. I swiped to the next page of the data dump, my heart racing as I dug deeper into his deleted emails. Nia had recovered messages that Declan had permanently scrubbed from his servers. I needed to find the exact trigger, the specific event that had pushed him to move from a long-term financial fraud to an immediate, violent murder plot against his own wife. A Ponzi scheme of this magnitude required constant, obsessive maintenance. As long as he could keep bringing in new clients, he could keep the plates spinning. But the numbers I was looking at showed that the new client acquisitions had severely dried up over the past 2 months. The market had slowed down, and his investors were beginning to ask hard questions about their returns. I checked the aggregated balance of his active client portfolios against the actual cash reserves held in the firm's accounts. The deficit was breathtaking. Declan was $4.5 million in the red. If a single major client requested a full withdrawal of their portfolio today, the entire scheme would instantly implode. Declan would be exposed, arrested, and handed a federal prison sentence. The $5 million life insurance policy on my life was not just a greedy cash grab. It was a desperate, bloody bailout. He needed my corpse to balance his ledgers. The battery indicator on the tablet flashed a bright warning red. 1% remaining. I scrolled frantically through the last folder of recovered emails, looking for any communication with the insurance company regarding the payout timeline. Instead, a completely different document caught my eye. It was an official correspondence carrying a highly restricted federal domain extension. The sender was the Securities and Exchange Commission. My blood turned to ice as I opened the PDF attachment. It was a formal, non-negotiable notification of a comprehensive compliance audit. The federal authorities had flagged irregular trading patterns originating from Declan's firm. They were demanding full, unrestricted access to all client portfolios, offshore transaction records, and internal communication logs. I stared at the timestamp on the digital letter. It had been delivered to Declan's private inbox exactly 48 hours ago. I looked at the mandated date for the federal inspection. The invisible ticking clock was finally revealed. Declan was trapped out of options and running out of time to cover his criminal tracks. The SEC was conducting their surprise audit of his firm in exactly 5 days. Exactly 5 days. The words burned into my retinas just as the cracked tablet screen flickered and went entirely black. The device had finally drained its last drop of power. I swallowed a scream of frustration, clutching the dead piece of plastic and glass against my chest. I could not lose my connection to Nia now. I was too close to the entire truth. My eyes darted around the steamy master bathroom, landing on my waterproof travel cosmetic bag resting near the double vanity. I remembered packing a high-capacity portable power bank for the long flights. I scrambled across the damp tile floor, unzipping the floral pouch with shaking hands. I dug past makeup brushes and moisturizers until my fingers wrapped around the heavy, rectangular battery and a frayed charging cable. I jammed the connector into the bottom of the tablet, pressing the power button with all the force I could muster. I sat perfectly still, listening to the muffled sounds of the house through the heavy oak door. There were no footsteps in the hallway. Declan was still downstairs in the glass patio, likely trying to appease his mother on the phone. A glowing white logo finally appeared on the dark screen. The tablet was alive again. I immediately reopened the encrypted application, pulling the SEC audit notification back into full view. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together in my analytical mind, forming a picture of unparalleled horror. In forensic accounting, you learn very quickly that desperate people do not commit crimes out of passion. They commit crimes because of deadlines. Declan was staring down the barrel of a federal investigation that would dismantle his entire life by next Wednesday. When the Securities and Exchange Commission agents walked into his sleek downtown office, they would demand instant access to his liquidity reserves. They would see the massive $4.5 million crater in his balance sheets. He would be arrested on the spot. His assets would be seized, and he would be facing a mandatory federal prison sentence for defrauding high-net-worth investors. His parents would lose their stolen luxury lifestyle. Sloane would lose her downtown condominium. The Golden Boy would become a convicted felon. He needed a massive, untraceable influx of cash to replace the stolen client funds before the auditors arrived, and he found his salvation in my blood. The $5 million term life insurance policy was not a random number. It was mathematically calculated to save him. $4.5 million to silently replace the embezzled client portfolios, erasing the fraud just in time for the federal inspection. That left a comfortable $500,000 in surplus. That extra cash would easily pay off Harrison's underground poker debts, cover Beverly's exorbitant country club dues, and keep Sloane living in the lap of luxury. I was not a wife to him. I was simply a depreciating asset that needed to be liquidated to balance his criminal ledgers. He had traded our 5-year marriage, our vows, and my future to save his own skin from a concrete prison cell. I sat on the bathroom floor, the thick steam rolling over my shoulders, and reconstructed his exact timeline for this weekend. It was a masterclass in premeditated butchery. We were supposed to fly out to the Caribbean today. Tomorrow morning, he would take me on a romantic hike up to those famously steep, jagged cliffs overlooking the ocean. He would wait until we were entirely alone, far away from any other tourists or resort staff. Then, he would push me over the edge. He would scramble down the rocks, fake a panic attack, and play the role of the traumatized husband who just watched his beloved wife lose her footing. By Sunday, the local island police would close the case as a tragic accident. On Monday morning, Declan would activate the special, expedited international payout rider he had specifically included in the insurance paperwork. The insurance company would release the funds. By Tuesday afternoon, the $5 million would securely drop into the Horizon Harbor Trust, heavily insulated from any personal scrutiny and legally controlled by his sister Sloane. Sloane would then quietly wire the required $4.5 million into Declan's corporate accounts. By Wednesday morning, Declan would be sitting at his mahogany desk, offering the SEC auditors a cup of coffee while they reviewed his flawlessly balanced books. He would get away with everything. He would receive sympathy from his wealthy clients for his tragic loss. His toxic family would continue wearing designer clothes purchased with blood money. And my body would be thousands of miles away, completely forgotten. A cold, razor-sharp focus suddenly replaced the suffocating terror in my chest. The naive, trusting woman who had brought him coffee and made him lunch was dead. She died the moment that coffee mug shattered against the kitchen wall. In her place was a forensic accountant who had spent a decade dismantling the financial structures of arrogant, greedy men. Declan thought he was the smartest person in the room because he viewed my career as boring and tedious. He severely underestimated the lethal efficiency of a woman who tracks missing money for a living. I was not going to be a victim on a Caribbean cliff. I was going to be his absolute destruction. The tablet vibrated sharply in my hands, jarring me from my thoughts. I looked down at the screen. A new notification badge appeared in the secure communication app. Nia had finished a second sweep of his digital footprint. She was moving with incredible speed, pulling data from the deepest, most secure corners of his devices. I tapped on the message thread. Nia had not sent another block of offshore bank statements. She had sent a single, massive text file. I opened the document, my eyes scanning the introductory header. It was a complete transcript of a recently recovered iMessage group chat. Declan had permanently deleted this conversation from his phone, believing the data was entirely unrecoverable. But Nia was a cybersecurity genius who knew exactly how to extract digital ghosts from the cloud. I looked at the participants listed at the top of the group chat. There were 4 names attached to the thread: Declan, Beverly Harrison, and Sloane. My entire family-in-law was in the chat. My finger hovered over the screen, trembling slightly, as I prepared to scroll down to read their exact words. I was about to see the unfiltered, unvarnished truth of how they planned my murder. I dragged my trembling finger up the glass of the cracked tablet screen, scrolling backward to the origin of the recovered group chat. The thread was simply titled Family Business. It was a digital graveyard of my marriage, exposing the rotten core of the people I had spent the last 5 years trying to blindly impress. I braced myself against the cold tile wall of the bathroom, the roaring shower continuing to mask the sound of my ragged, uneven breathing. I started reading the messages from exactly 3 weeks ago, right around the time Declan began enthusiastically pitching the idea of a romantic Caribbean anniversary getaway. The sheer banality of their evil was breathtaking. They did not discuss my impending murder with any sense of gravity, guilt, or hesitation. They talked about my violent death the way ordinary people discussed a delayed wire transfer or a frustrating administrative error. To them, I was not a living, breathing human being who had sat at their Thanksgiving table and celebrated their birthdays. I was nothing more than a convenient obstacle, blocking their immediate access to $5 million. The first message I read was from Harrison, the father-in-law, who always greeted me with a booming laugh and a firm hug. His text was dripping with aristocratic panic. Declan, the country club, just sent a final collection notice to my private email. They are threatening to publicly suspend my golf and dining privileges by this Friday. This is absolutely humiliating. I cannot show my face in the members' lounge if they freeze my tab. You swore this cash flow problem was temporary. You need to fix this immediately. Declan responded a minute later, playing the role of the dutiful problem-solving son. I am handling it, Dad. I just need you to be patient for a few more weeks. I am finalizing a major liquidation. Everything will be fully resolved by next Tuesday. I stared at the word liquidation. It made my stomach violently churn. In the sterile, clinical world of finance, liquidation meant converting assets into cash. In this group chat, liquidation meant pushing me off a jagged cliff. A new text bubbled up from Sloane, the sister-in-law, who had spent years making thinly veiled, condescending remarks about my choice of sensible shoes and my dedication to a boring accounting career. Tuesday is cutting it way too close, Depp. The escrow on my new downtown property closes on Thursday morning. The real estate broker is breathing down my neck for the final cash deposit. When exactly does the trust fund money clear? You promised me the Horizon Harbor account would be fully funded by the 10th of the month. I cannot lose this property, Declan replied with cold, mechanical precision. The insurance underwriters have a mandated 48-hour holding period for international incidents. I have an expedited legal rider in place on the policy. As long as the primary event happens on Saturday morning, the funds will clear the trust account by Tuesday afternoon. You will have your cash for the condo. I pressed my hand hard against my mouth to trap a muffled sob. The primary event. That was me. That was my murder. They were coordinating the exact timing of my death to ensure Sloane did not miss out on a luxury real estate deal. The most enraging message came from Beverly, the matriarch, who had spent years parading around Seattle society pretending she was old money royalty. It better clear by Tuesday. My credit cards are bouncing at high-end boutiques across the city. I actually had to put a designer handbag back on the shelf today. A handbag, Declan. Your father and I did not raise you to let us live like common peasants. We deserve better than this embarrassment. Get it done. I scrolled further down, reading the messages from just 2 days ago. Declan had sent a lengthy update to the group, detailing the logistics of our anniversary trip. The Caribbean villa is locked in. The property is completely isolated. I made sure there are no security cameras on the trails and no resort staff within a 2-mile radius. We are going to hike the South Ridge early Saturday morning. The drop is over 200 feet straight down into a rocky, violent surf. The local authorities will never even recover a body to perform an autopsy. The payout is completely guaranteed. Harrison replied almost instantly. Good. Make sure your story is absolutely bulletproof for the island police. Cry a lot. Tell them she slipped taking a selfie. You were always a fantastic actor, son. Do not overplay it, but make them pity you. Sloane chimed in next, displaying a level of callous squeezing cold. Just do not mess up the paperwork this time, Declan. If my trust name is misspelled on the claim forms, the payout gets delayed by 30 days for a legal review. I cannot wait 30 days for this money. Do your job properly. Every single word was a brutal stab to my chest. But the forensic accountant in me was simultaneously analyzing the incredible legal weight of this evidence. Nia had handed me the holy grail of criminal prosecution. This group chat proved premeditation conspiracy to commit murder and intent to commit insurance fraud. It proved that Harrison, Beverly, and Sloane were all active, willing accomplices. They were entirely bankrupt, completely desperate, and willing to slaughter me to maintain their fake, luxurious facade. My eyes dropped to the very last message in the thread, sent by Beverly, just hours before Declan forced me to sign those final insurance documents. It was a message so incredibly ruthless that it froze the air in my lungs. I stared at the glowing text on the cracked screen, my heart stopping entirely. Beverly had written, "Make sure the cliff at the villa is high enough. I do not want to pay her medical bills if she only ends up paralyzed. Do it right." The sheer cruelty of those 3 words struck me like a physical blow. Do it right. I sat on the damp bathroom tiles, forcing my lungs to draw in a slow, agonizing breath. I had seen enough. I had every single piece of forensic evidence I needed to put my husband and his parasitic family behind bars. But none of that data would matter if I did not survive the next 24 hours. I closed the encrypted messaging application, wiping the background task manager clean to ensure no trace of my conversation with Nia remained active. I held down the power button, watching the cracked screen fade to a lifeless black. I quickly disconnected the charging cable, shoved the power bank back into my cosmetic bag, and buried the old tablet deep within the folded bath towels under the sink. I stood up on shaking legs, smoothing down my plush robe. I turned off the shower, plunging the bathroom into a terrifying, heavy silence. The roaring waterfall had been my auditory shield, and now I was completely exposed. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped cautiously into the upstairs hallway. The air conditioning sent a violent shiver down my spine. I gripped the wooden banister and quietly descended the stairs, forcing my face into a mask of exhausted submission. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room, I could see Declan standing on the glass patio. He was just ending his phone call with Beverly. He took a deep breath, instantly replacing the look of a panicked criminal with the warm, reassuring smile of a devoted husband. He slid the heavy glass door open and stepped back into the house. "Are you feeling any better, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice smooth and practically dripping with fake concern. "My mother sends her love. She says it is a shame we have to delay the trip, but your health absolutely comes first." I forced a weak, appreciative nod, wrapping my arms tightly around my waist. "The medication is starting to help a little," I lied, my voice deliberately fragile. "I just feel so drained." Declan closed the distance between us, placing a warm, heavy hand on my shoulder. "You just need a quiet day at home," he murmured softly. He guided me toward the plush living room sofa. As we walked past the built-in shelving unit in the main hallway, Declan suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. His hand stiffened on my shoulder. I followed his gaze, my heart plummeting straight into my stomach. Resting on the top shelf was our central fiber optic router. Declan had locked me out of the primary wireless network hours ago, but the router itself was still powered on, and right now, the data transfer light was blinking with a frantic, aggressive speed. It was flashing green in a rapid sequence, indicating a massive flow of data was actively moving through the local network. Declan was a man who obsessed over digital security. He had personally suspended my cell phone service and restricted the home network to his devices only. He looked down at his own smartphone, confirming it was securely locked and not downloading any large files. The rapid blinking of the green light reflected in his cold, pale eyes. He knew exactly what that pattern meant. Someone in the immediate vicinity was pulling a massive amount of data. And since we lived on a secluded, heavily wooded lot, the only person who could possibly be downloading anything was standing right next to him. His hand slowly dropped from my shoulder. The Golden Boy facade vanished, instantly replaced by the lethal, calculating stare of a cornered predator. He looked at me, his eyes sweeping over my damp hair and the thick robe. He was connecting the dots in real time. The sudden violent illness, the long, incredibly loud shower, the frantic data transfer happening right under his nose. "You were supposedly resting in the bathroom," Declan stated, his voice devoid of any warmth or inflection. "I was in the shower," I stammered, taking a desperate step backward. "The steam helps my stomach." Declan did not argue. He did not yell. He moved with a terrifying, purposeful silence. He reached up to the shelving unit and grabbed the thick black power cable connected to the back of the router. With one violent, vicious yank, he ripped the cord completely out of the wall socket. The frantic green lights died instantly. The house was now entirely severed from the digital world. But he did not stop there. Declan walked purposefully over to the central smart home command panel, mounted on the hallway wall. This panel controlled everything in our glass house. The exterior security cameras, the motion sensors, the automated electronic locks, and the alarm system. I watched in absolute horror as his fingers danced rapidly across the digital keypad. He typed in his master administrator override code. He bypassed the standard security protocols and navigated straight to the deep system settings. With 3 swift taps, he manually disabled the exterior camera recording feeds. He completely shut down the emergency panic alarm connection that linked our house directly to the local police dispatch center. He was creating a massive blind spot. He was ensuring that there would be absolutely zero digital record of what happened inside this house over the next few hours. No cameras to capture a struggle, no alarms to alert the authorities, no wireless signal to send a desperate message for help. He turned around to face me. The silence in the house was deafening, pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. The air felt thick and suffocating. Declan slowly reached up and unbuttoned the cuffs of his expensive tailored shirt, rolling the sleeves up his forearms with a chilling, methodical precision. He was preparing for physical labor. He was preparing for a slaughter. I backed away, my bare feet slipping slightly on the polished hardwood floor. "Declan," I whispered, my voice cracking with genuine terror. "What are you doing? Why did you turn off the security system?" Declan tilted his head, his eyes dead and cold. He looked at me, not as his wife, but as a liability that needed to be aggressively liquidated before the federal auditors arrived next week. The $5 million deadline had pushed him past the point of no return. "Change of plans," he says. "We aren't going to the Caribbean anymore. Accidents can happen right here at home." The words hung in the chilling air of our living room, heavy with lethal intent. Declan did not lunge at me. He did not scream or brandish a weapon. Instead, he reached into the back pocket of his tailored trousers and pulled out a pair of supple black leather driving gloves. Gloves meant no defensive scratches on his hands. Gloves meant absolutely zero DNA evidence trapped beneath my fingernails during a desperate struggle for survival. He was ensuring that when the county coroner examined my body, they would find nothing but the tragic results of a severe blunt force impact. He was meticulously sanitizing a crime scene before the crime had even been committed. He took a slow step toward me, pulling the tight leather over his long fingers. The soft snapping sound of the material stretching across his knuckles echoed off the glass walls. I took a step backward, my bare heel sliding against the polished hardwood. There was nowhere to run. The heavy deadbolt on the front door was thrown, the patio doors were locked, and the smart home security network was dead. Declan closed the distance between us with the effortless grace of a predator who knows its prey has exhausted all escape routes. He reached out and wrapped his gloved hand around my upper arm. His grip was not bruising. It was firm, calculated, and entirely controlling. He was steering me, forcing my body weight to shift exactly where he wanted me to go. "Walk with me, Gemma," he commanded softly, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "You are feeling incredibly dizzy. You are dehydrated from the food poisoning. You need to go downstairs to the basement utility room to fetch a bottle of electrolyte water." I tried to plant my feet, fighting against the forward momentum, but his grip tightened just enough to propel me forward. He was guiding me down the main corridor, heading straight for the solid oak door that concealed the basement staircase. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. The basement stairs in our modern home were not carpeted. They were constructed of solid, unforgiving oak, dropping at a steep, hazardous angle directly onto a poured concrete floor. A fall from the top landing was a guaranteed death sentence: a snapped neck, a crushed skull, massive internal hemorrhaging. It was a flawlessly horrific backup plan. Declan had pivoted from an international murder plot to a tragic domestic accident, and the narrative was absolutely airtight. He would call his best friend the local police chief in a state of hysterical grief. He would explain through manufactured sobs how his beloved wife, severely weakened and disoriented by a sudden stomach illness, had lost her footing at the top of the stairs. The authorities would find my body broken at the bottom of the steps. They would see the vomit in the master bathroom sink. They would note the uncharacteristically long shower I had taken to soothe my imaginary stomach cramps. Every detail I had fabricated to stall our trip had actively laid the groundwork for my own perfect murder. He was going to use my fake illness as the ultimate alibi. We reached the end of the corridor. Declan reached out with his free hand and twisted the brass knob of the basement door, pushing it wide open. A wave of stale, frigid air rushed up from the darkness below. It was pitch black. My toes curled against the edge of the top landing. I looked down into the abyss, my lungs refusing to draw in oxygen. He positioned himself slightly behind me and to the left, establishing the perfect angle to deliver a forceful, two-handed shove directly to the center of my upper back. A push from that angle would instantly throw my center of gravity forward, preventing my hands from catching the handrail. It was basic physics, weaponized for slaughter. My mind raced through survival algorithms in a fraction of a second. I could not outmuscle him. Declan was lean muscle, fueled by the desperate energy of a man facing federal prison and absolute financial ruin. If I fought him at the top of this staircase, he would simply lift me up and throw me over the edge. I needed a tactical disruption. I needed an immediate physical obstacle that would break his concentration and force him to release his iron grip on my arm. My eyes darted frantically around the perimeter of the landing. Positioned just to the right of the basement doorframe sat a tall, heavy marble pedestal. Resting directly on top of it was a massive, thick, decorative glass vase that his mother Beverly had gifted us for our wedding. Declan shifted his weight, his tight leather fingers pressing firmly against my spine. "You should have just gotten on the plane, Gemma," he whispered directly into my ear, his breath hot against my freezing skin. It would have been so much more scenic. I felt his muscles tense. He was initiating the final thrust. I completely stopped fighting his forward momentum. Instead, I weaponized my own body weight. I violently threw myself backward and twisted my entire torso toward the right side of the doorframe. I deliberately kicked my ankle outward, hooking my bare foot around the heavy base of the marble pedestal. Declan gasped in surprise as my sudden, erratic movement threw him completely off balance. His grip on my arm slipped as I crashed backward into the stone column. The impact sent a shockwave of blinding pain up my shoulder, but it worked. The marble pedestal tipped violently to the side. The massive glass vase launched into the air, suspended in the silent hallway for one agonizingly long second. It slammed onto the polished hardwood floor between us with a deafening, explosive crash. Thousands of razor-sharp shards of thick glass sprayed across the top landing, creating an instant, treacherous barrier of jagged debris right at the edge of the fatal drop. Declan recoiled violently, throwing his leather-clad hands over his face to shield his eyes from the exploding shrapnel. The heavy shards of thick glass rained down across the landing, creating a lethal, impassable barrier between us. He let out a sharp, furious curse, his expensive leather shoes crunching dangerously against the jagged fragments as he struggled to maintain his balance on the edge of the stairwell. I did not waste a single millisecond watching him recover. I spun around on my bare feet, ignoring the sharp sting as a tiny sliver of broken glass grazed my heel. Adrenaline flooded my nervous system, entirely numbing the physical pain. I sprinted away from the basement door, my legs pumping furiously as I fled down the main corridor. My mind operated with the cold, detached speed of a supercomputer analyzing a rapidly failing corporate structure. I was locked inside a high-tech fortress. Declan had engaged the manual deadbolt on the front door, a heavy brass mechanism that required a physical key from the inside. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room were constructed from impact-resistant smart glass, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds and completely shatterproof against any blunt object I could lift. I careened around the corner and slid into the massive gourmet kitchen, my chest heaving as I scanned the room for an exit. The heavy back door leading out to the patio was my only theoretical escape route, but Declan had meticulously engaged the secondary key lock on that door as well. I was entirely boxed in. There was no direct path to freedom that did not require breaking through reinforced glass or bypassing high-grade steel locks. Actions that would take precious minutes I simply did not have. I heard the distinct, heavy crunch of Declan's shoes stepping off the glass-covered landing. He was coming. He was no longer rushing. He did not need to run because he knew exactly what the architectural layout of this house dictated. He knew I was trapped in a dead end. I needed to fundamentally alter his perception of reality. In my career as a forensic accountant, I spent my life untangling false narratives created by desperate people trying to hide their crimes. Now I needed to construct a false narrative of my own. I had to build a physical lie so convincing that it would completely blind a sociopathic wealth manager. I had to fake a gruesome injury to buy myself the ultimate distraction. I bolted toward the massive walk-in pantry, ripping the door open. My eyes frantically swept the organized shelves. I grabbed a heavy, dark green bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon that Beverly had gifted us last Christmas. Next to the baking supplies, I snatched a large plastic bottle of thick, dark corn syrup. I rushed back to the locked back door, my bare feet silent against the cold ceramic kitchen tiles. I raised the heavy wine bottle high above my head and hurled it downward with all my strength, aiming directly at the reinforced metal baseboard of the locked door. The glass bottle shattered explosively on impact. The dark red wine sprayed across the white cabinets and pooled aggressively on the pristine ceramic floor. I immediately unscrewed the cap of the corn syrup and squeezed the bottle hard, dumping the thick, viscous liquid directly into the center of the spreading wine puddle. I grabbed a white kitchen towel from the counter and rapidly stirred the mixture together. The sticky corn syrup bonded with the dark red wine, instantly transforming the thin alcohol into a dense, coagulated fluid. In the dim, overcast morning light filtering through the kitchen windows, the concoction looked exactly like a massive, terrifying pool of arterial blood. It was a flawless visual forgery. I dropped to my knees, dipping the palms of my hands directly into the sticky red mess. I slapped my coated hands violently against the white kitchen cabinets and the glass panes of the locked back door, dragging my fingers downward to create desperate, bloody smear marks. I engineered a scene of sheer panic, designing the exact physical evidence a terrified, severely injured woman would leave behind while fruitlessly trying to smash her way out of a locked door. I soaked the kitchen towel in the remaining red mixture and stood up. I dragged the dripping towel across the floor, creating an unbroken, heavy trail of fake blood leading directly away from the back door and straight into the dark, cavernous walk-in pantry. I tossed the saturated towel into the furthest, darkest corner of the pantry floor, making sure it landed with a heavy, wet thud. I left the pantry door cracked open just an inch, the perfect visual bait for an arrogant predator. I did not stay in the kitchen to admire my handiwork. Connected to the kitchen was the small, narrow laundry room. I backed out of the kitchen, wiping my sticky hands on my plush robe, and slipped silently into the laundry room, pulling the door completely shut behind me. I pressed my back against the vibrating metal casing of the washing machine, forcing my breathing into shallow, silent intakes of air. Seconds later, I heard the slow, deliberate thud of Declan's footsteps entering the kitchen. He was not trying to be quiet. He wanted me to hear him coming. He wanted to paralyze me with fear before he delivered the final blow. From the narrow gap beneath the laundry room door, I watched his shadow stretch across the kitchen tiles. In his right hand, gripped tightly through the black leather of his driving gloves, he held a heavy, solid bronze bookend he had taken from the hallway console table. It was a brutal, blunt instrument perfectly selected to crush a human skull. I watched his shadow freeze. He had reached the back door. He saw the shattered green glass, the desperate bloody handprints smeared across the white cabinets, and the massive thick pool of dark red liquid soaking into the grout. A low, chilling chuckle rumbled from his chest. It was the sound of absolute, victorious satisfaction. In his arrogant mind, his terrified, naive wife had injured herself catastrophically trying to break through reinforced glass. He believed I was rapidly bleeding out, weakened and defenseless. His heavy footsteps resumed moving with a renewed predatory eagerness. I watched his shadow pivot away from the locked back door. He lowered the heavy bronze bookend slightly, preparing his grip. The trail of fake blood was guiding him flawlessly. He stepped slowly and deliberately across the kitchen, following the thick red smears straight toward the partially open pantry door. The very instant Declan's shadow completely crossed the threshold into the pantry, I moved. I did not wait to hear the heavy bronze bookend strike the floor. I did not wait for his inevitable roar of pure rage when he discovered the bloody towel was nothing but a soaking wet rag covered in wine and corn syrup. I had roughly 30 seconds before he realized the entire scene was a meticulously fabricated lie. I scrambled silently up onto the vibrating metal lid of the washing machine, my bare feet gripping the cold enamel surface. My target was the small rectangular ventilation window positioned high on the wall near the ceiling. The window was designed to release exhaust and heat, absolutely not meant to serve as an egress point for a human being. I reached up, my fingers desperately clawing at the thick metal latch. The locking mechanism was stiff from years of disuse, rusted shut by the humid Seattle air. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the stinging pain in my torn heel, and forced the heel of my palm against the latch. It gave way with a sharp, terrifying snap. The sound was surprisingly loud in the confined space of the laundry room. My heart stopped. I froze on top of the washing machine, listening intently for any shift in Declan's movements from the kitchen. A violent, explosive crash echoed from the pantry. Declan had realized the truth. He was tearing the wooden shelves apart in a blind, murderous fury. His primal scream of absolute rage vibrated through the drywall, a sound so entirely unhinged it stripped away any remaining doubt about the monster I had married. The decoy had worked perfectly, but my execution window was rapidly slamming shut. I pushed the glass pane outward, welcoming the vicious blast of freezing, rain-scented air that rushed into the suffocating laundry room. I hoisted myself up, gripping the narrow wooden sill. The opening was incredibly tight. I forced my head and shoulders through the gap, my plush robe catching on the jagged metal hinges. I ignored the sharp scrape against my ribcage, twisting my torso violently to squeeze my hips through the restrictive frame. I wriggled forward, letting gravity pull my upper body out into the harsh morning elements. I tumbled headfirst out of the window. I threw my arms out to brace for the impact plummeting through the frigid air. I crashed violently into the flower bed directly beneath the laundry room. The freezing, saturated mud absorbed the brunt of my fall, sending a shockwave of biting cold directly into my bones. The thick, wet earth splashed across my face and soaked instantly through my robe. I gasped, fighting the sudden urge to cough the freezing air out of my burning lungs. I scrambled to my feet, my bare toes sinking deep into the icy sludge. I pressed my back against the exterior brick wall of the house, terrified that the impact had alerted him. Inside, the sound of systematic destruction continued. Declan was hunting. He was searching every closet, every cabinet, completely tearing our flawless glass house apart from the inside out. I tore my eyes away from the structure and looked frantically across the sprawling, manicured backyard. The entire neighborhood was swallowed in an unnatural, absolute darkness. Our affluent, heavily monitored Seattle suburb was usually bathed in the warm, bright glow of automated LED streetlights. Not today. The long, winding road stretching beyond our property line was entirely pitch black. Nia had delivered exactly as promised. My brilliant, relentless sister-in-law had successfully hacked the municipal power grid for our specific subdivision. She had selectively killed the streetlights, plunging the entire block into a manufactured blackout to conceal my escape route. I squinted through the dense, gray morning fog. Parked illegally across the street, tucked deep into the shadows of an ancient pine tree, was a sleek, dark sedan. The engine was running, indicated by the faint, rhythmic exhaust pluming into the cold air, but the headlights were completely dead. It was Leo. My younger brother was waiting for me in the dark. I did not hesitate. I broke away from the side of the house and sprinted blindly across the backyard. The freezing mud sucked at my bare feet, threatening to pull me down with every single stride. I ignored the sharp rocks and broken twigs tearing into my soles. I vaulted over the low decorative stone wall, marking our property boundary, hitting the wet asphalt of the street with a heavy, jarring slap. I sprinted across the blacked-out road, my lungs burning, my wet robe clinging heavily to my freezing legs. As I neared the idling sedan, the rear passenger door swung open. "Get in," Leo hissed from the driver's seat, his voice tight with raw adrenaline. I dove headfirst into the back seat, my mud-covered body collapsing against the luxurious leather upholstery. I scrambled frantically to pull my legs inside and yanked the heavy door shut behind me. The lock engaged instantly with a solid, reassuring, mechanical thud. I collapsed onto the floorboard, gasping desperately for air, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. In the passenger seat, illuminated only by the harsh green glow of a laptop screen, sat Nia. Her fingers were flying across her keyboard with terrifying speed, lines of complex code reflecting in her dark eyes. She did not even look up from her screen as I dragged myself up onto the back seat. "I locked him out of his own offshore accounts," Nia announced, her voice a deadly calm whisper in the dark interior of the car. "I severed his access tokens. He cannot move a single dime of that stolen money. I have the entire encrypted hard drive secured right here. We have everything we need to bury him and his entire parasitic family. Go!" I gasped out, grabbing the back of Leo's seat. "Leo, drive, right now!" Leo slammed the car into drive. He did not bother turning on the headlights. He hit the accelerator, the tires screeching against the wet pavement as the heavy sedan launched forward into the protective darkness of the hacked neighborhood. I twisted my body around, looking out the rear window of the speeding car. Through the thick morning fog, I stared back at the sprawling, million-dollar glass house I had once called a home. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a monument to a spectacular, failed execution. Just as Leo whipped the car around the corner, accelerating onto the main arterial road, a blinding flash of illumination pierced the fog. Every single light inside the glass house violently flicked on at the exact same time. The structure blazed like a beacon in the dark. Declan had finished tearing the ground floor apart. He had realized the decoy was a trap, and he had found the open laundry room window. The golden boy knew his prey had successfully slipped the snare. He knew I was gone, and judging by the aggressive blaze of lights illuminating his failed slaughterhouse, he knew that his $5 million deadline had just become a catastrophic reality. The 48 hours that followed my frantic escape into the rainy Seattle night were a relentless blur of cheap coffee, drawn blinds, and intense digital warfare. We had immediately abandoned the manicured streets of my affluent neighborhood, driving Leo's car straight to a rundown, cash-only motel located on the desolate industrial outskirts of the city. It was the kind of shady establishment that asked zero questions and possessed absolutely no surveillance cameras in the cracked asphalt parking lot. The stained carpets, flickering fluorescent lights, and peeling wallpaper of the cramped room provided a stark, aggressive contrast to the multi-million-dollar glass mansion I had just fled. But as I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, wrapped in an oversized gray hoodie Leo had purchased from a local truck stop, I had never felt more incredibly safe. Leo paced back and forth across the narrow room like a caged animal, periodically pulling back the edge of the dusty Venetian blinds to scan the empty parking lot for any sign of Declan or the local police. Sitting at the small, wobbly laminate desk in the corner was Nia. She had not slept a single minute since we arrived. Her fingers continuously hammered across her specialized mechanical keyboard as she secured the massive cache of stolen financial data, meticulously backing it up to multiple offshore, offline servers. She was methodically building the undeniable legal guillotine we were preparing to drop directly onto my husband's neck. I sat entirely still on the edge of the bed, my eyes glued to the small, flickering television mounted on the far wall. The local evening news broadcast was just beginning, and I knew Declan was about to make his next calculated move. He was a trapped rat. His $5 million deadline was rapidly evaporating, and he desperately needed a public narrative to protect his crumbling criminal empire. The local news anchor appeared on the screen instantly, adopting a grave, deeply sympathetic tone. "A breaking story tonight out of one of Seattle's most exclusive neighborhoods," the anchor announced, staring solemnly into the camera. "A prominent local wealth manager is pleading for the public's help after his wife vanished under highly distressing and mysterious circumstances." The broadcast immediately cut to a live video feed taking place right on the lush front lawn of my former home. A dense cluster of reporters and local news vans crowded the grass. Stepping up to a podium bristling with microphones was Declan. My breath hitched sharply in my throat as I watched the man who had planned to push me off a Caribbean cliff perform the absolute greatest acting role of his entire life. He looked thoroughly devastated. He was not wearing his usual pristine, tailored designer suit. Instead, he wore a rumpled dark sweater, his hair deliberately disheveled, his pale eyes bloodshot and heavily swollen, as if he had been weeping for 2 days straight. The arrogant golden boy had seamlessly transformed into the shattered, desperate husband pleading for help. He gripped the outer edges of the wooden podium, hanging his head for a brief, highly dramatic moment before looking directly into the flashing camera lenses. "My wife, Gemma, has been missing for 2 days," Declan began, his voice cracking with a perfectly calculated emotional tremor. "We were supposed to leave for our anniversary trip to the Caribbean this weekend, but she fell violently ill with severe food poisoning. Her fever spiked dangerously high. I left her resting in bed for just a few minutes to take an urgent business call in my office. When I came back upstairs, she was completely gone." I gripped the coarse motel bedspread, my fingernails digging viciously into the cheap fabric. His narrative was flawlessly terrifying because he was using exact fragments of the actual truth to build a massive, impenetrable lie. She was severely dehydrated and highly delirious from the intense fever. Declan continued reaching up to wipe a stray fabricated tear from his cheek. We found signs of a terrible struggle near the locked back patio door. She broke a heavy glass vase and cut herself badly. The police tracked her bloody footprints through the mud leading straight out of the backyard and directly down toward the steep river embankment. The current is incredibly fast right now because of the recent winter storms. I am begging anyone who might have seen her wandering along the riverbanks to please contact the authorities immediately. She is sick, confused, injured, and she desperately needs to come home. It was an absolute masterpiece of psychological manipulation. He had taken my desperate decoy, the shattered wine bottle, the corn syrup blood, and the frantic, muddy footprints I left when I sprinted to Leo's car, and woven them into a tragic, believable story of accidental drowning. By suggesting I had wandered into the fast-flowing river in a state of feverish delirium, he was brilliantly setting the stage for my body to never be recovered. In Washington state, a person could be declared legally dead after a specific waiting period if the circumstantial evidence of a fatal accident was strong enough. Declan was laying the exact legal groundwork to eventually collect the $5 million life insurance policy without ever having to actually produce my corpse. The camera angle on the television widened, panning slightly to the right to capture the family members standing in solemn, supportive solidarity behind him. There, flanking the grieving husband, were Beverly and Sloane. Seeing their faces on the screen sent a surge of pure, unadulterated rage racing through my veins. Beverly had her arm wrapped tightly around her daughter's shoulders. Both women were dressed in somber, conservative dark clothing, holding crumpled white tissues to their faces. They dabbed at their perfectly dry eyes, nodding sympathetically as Declan spoke to the reporters. These were the exact same women who had ruthlessly mocked my accounting career for years. The same women who had funded their designer wardrobes and luxury condominiums entirely with the stolen life savings of innocent investors. The exact same women who had typed text messages demanding Declan ensure the Caribbean cliff was high enough so I would not survive the fall. And now they were standing on national television playing the role of a devastated, heartbroken family mourning their beloved daughter-in-law. The sheer, shameless audacity made my stomach churn violently. Declan cleared his throat, leaning closer to the microphones, to deliver his final, sickening statement to the press. Despite this horrific tragedy, I know my strong, beautiful wife would want me to carry on, he said, his voice dropping to a somber, determined whisper. Tomorrow night is my firm's annual wealth management gala. It is our most important event of the entire year, bringing together our wonderful community of investors. Gemma was always so incredibly proud of the financial work we do for our clients. Therefore, the gala will proceed as scheduled tomorrow evening. However, I will be dedicating the entire night to my missing beloved wife. I will never stop hoping for her safe return. The television screen cut back to the sympathetic news anchor in the bright studio, but I was no longer listening to the broadcast. I stood up slowly from the sagging motel mattress, the oversized gray hoodie suddenly feeling like a heavy suit of armor. The intense anger that had been simmering in my chest finally boiled over, completely burning away any remaining traces of fear, shock, or hesitation. Declan had just handed me the ultimate weapon. He had given me a specific time, a public place, and a captive audience composed entirely of the wealthy clients he was actively defrauding. He wanted to dedicate a glamorous high society gala to his missing wife, while quietly plotting to collect her blood money to save himself from federal prison. I turned to face Naya and Leo, a cold, ruthless smile spreading across my face. "He wants a memorial," I said, my voice steady and echoing with absolute certainty in the cramped motel room. "He wants to stand on a beautifully lit stage tomorrow night and tell all his elite, wealthy clients exactly how much he loved me." Nia stopped typing instantly. She closed her encrypted laptop with a sharp snap and looked up at me, a dangerous matching smile forming on her lips. She understood exactly what I was planning. "We are not going to the police yet," I told them, walking over to the dusty window and staring out into the dark, empty parking lot. If we go to his friends at the local precinct, he will spin the narrative. He will say I am unstable and delirious. He will use his connections to bury the evidence before the federal auditors arrive. We need to destroy him in a way he can never, ever recover from. I turned back to my brother and my brilliant sister-in-law. Get the financial records formatted for a massive digital projection, I instructed, my tone shifting into pure forensic authority. Tomorrow night, we are going to attend the annual Wealth Management Gala, and I'm going to show every single one of his VIP clients exactly who they are trusting with their money. Leo gripped the back of the motel desk chair, his protective instincts flaring. Gemma, this is reckless. We have the data proving a murder conspiracy. We need to drive straight to the local police precinct right now and hand this over. I cannot go to the local authorities, Leo. Declan plays golf every Sunday with the county police chief. He donates heavily to their benevolent fund. If we walk into that station, the desk sergeant will call Declan before we even finish the report. Declan will claim his grieving, delirious wife is having a psychotic break. He will use the fake food poisoning narrative to have me committed to a psychiatric ward. The digital evidence will vanish from the evidence locker, and by next week, I will be legally declared incompetent. I will never see the outside of a hospital room again. Leo went silent, realizing the truth of Declan's local influence. We needed a higher authority, but more importantly, we needed a public spectacle. If we took the evidence to the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission, behind closed doors, Declan might still manipulate the timeline. He could quietly liquidate assets, flee the country, or tip off his wealthy parents. The only way to stop a parasite is to expose it to the blinding light of public accountability. I looked at Nia. I need you to weaponize the data, I told her. I need you to take every single spreadsheet, every fraudulent offshore wire transfer, and every message from that group chat and bundle it into one massive, undeniable visual presentation. Make it bold, make it completely impossible for any of his elite investors to ignore. Nia smiled, her fingers flying across her keyboard. I will build a digital guillotine, she promised. I will compile the embezzlement ledgers so clearly that anyone can see the $4.5 million crater. I will highlight the life insurance policy right next to the date of the upcoming federal audit, and I will blow up screenshots of Beverly and Harrison plotting your murder in high definition. No one in that ballroom will have a shadow of a doubt about who Declan really is. But we needed access. The annual Wealth Management Gala was the most exclusive financial event in Seattle. The ballroom at the downtown luxury hotel would be locked down tighter than a bank vault, swarming with private security, hired specifically to protect the ultra-wealthy attendees. We could not just walk through the front doors. Leo pulled out his phone, mentally scrolling through his professional contacts. Managing logistics for a commercial real estate firm meant he knew the operational staff of almost every luxury building downtown. The gala is in the grand ballroom of the Apex Hotel, Leo said. The primary security detail will be checking guest names against a strict VIP registry, but the audio-visual team operates on a different vendor access list. I know the operations manager who handles the service elevators. Give me an hour. I will secure us vendor credentials and clearance badges. While Leo worked the phones and Nia aggressively compiled the financial ruin of my in-laws, I realized I needed to prepare myself for the physical confrontation. For 5 years, I had blended into the background. I had worn neutral colors, sensible blazers, and quiet skirts. I had actively muted my own presence to allow Declan and his arrogant family to shine in the spotlight. They expected the boring, plain forensic accountant to either die quietly on a rocky cliff or cower in fear in a hospital bed. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a broken woman. I was going to deliver their destruction in person, and I was going to do it looking like an absolute nightmare dressed as a daydream. I left the motel, pulling the hood of Leo's oversized sweatshirt over my head to obscure my face, and took a cash-only taxi to a high-end boutique on the opposite side of the city. I bypassed the racks of conservative business wear and sensible evening gowns. I walked straight toward the back of the store, my eyes scanning the vibrant fabrics until I found exactly what I was looking for. It was a stunning, floor-length, tailored evening gown. The fabric was heavy, luxurious silk, and the color was a blinding, unapologetic crimson red. It was the exact color of the fake blood I had smeared across my kitchen cabinets. It was a dress designed to demand total attention, a dress that consumed all the oxygen in a room the moment the wearer walked through the door. I paid for the gown using a secure, untraceable prepaid debit card Nia had generated for me. I carried the heavy garment bag back to the dreary motel room, hanging the crimson silk over the cheap wooden door of the closet. As evening fell over the city, I stood in front of the scratched, smudged mirror above the motel sink. I applied my makeup with cold, meticulous precision. I defined my jawline, darkened my eyelashes, and painted my lips a deep, striking shade of scarlet. I stripped off the baggy gray hoodie and stepped into the crimson gown. The heavy silk clung perfectly to my frame, radiating an aura of lethal confidence. I stared at my reflection. The terrified, submissive wife who had vomited in the sink and begged for her husband's forgiveness was completely gone. The woman looking back at me was a calculated, unyielding executioner. I was not going to hide in the shadows while my husband stood on a brilliantly lit stage and accepted sympathy for my tragic, fictional death. I was going to crash my own memorial. The Apex Hotel in downtown Seattle was an imposing fortress of polished marble and tinted glass. Leo pulled his dark sedan into the underground loading dock, flashing the vendor credentials he had secured just hours earlier. The security guard barely glanced at us waving the vehicle through the heavy steel gate. Nia sat in the back, with her laptop open, seamlessly tapping into the hotel internal network. She was mapping the audio-visual system for the grand ballroom, setting up the exact pathway she needed to hijack the massive projector screens on the main stage. Leo guided us through the labyrinth of concrete service corridors, intentionally bypassing the heavily guarded main lobby where Seattle elite were currently sipping champagne. I walked between my brother and my sister-in-law, the heavy crimson silk of my gown swishing quietly against the sterile floors. My heart beat with a steady drum-like precision. There was no fear left in my veins. There was only the cold, calculated anticipation of a forensic auditor about to drop a devastating final report on a corrupt corporation. We reached the service elevator that opened directly into the backstage preparation area of the grand ballroom. Naya plugged a small, modified receiver into a digital junction box hidden behind a large decorative planter. "I have full control of the main stage displays," she whispered, her eyes locked on her glowing screen. "I will monitor the live audio feed from here. Give me the signal, and I will drop the hammer on his entire life." Leo handed me a small, wireless microphone he had quickly swiped from an unattended sound cart. He squeezed my hand tightly, his jaw set with fierce determination. "We are right behind you," he promised. I stepped into the dimly lit antechamber just behind the massive oak doors at the rear of the ballroom. Through the narrow crack between the heavy wooden panels, I could see the sprawling, opulent space. Hundreds of Seattle's wealthiest investors, tech billionaires, and real estate moguls sat at lavishly decorated tables. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the expensive floral arrangements and silver centerpieces. And there, standing center stage, under a brilliant, focusing spotlight, was Declan. He was delivering the performance of a lifetime. He wore a sharp, custom-tailored black suit, his posture slightly slumped to expertly convey a deep, profound exhaustion. The giant screen behind him displayed a massive, tasteful photograph of me smiling on our wedding day. I watched as he gripped the edges of the wooden podium, taking a shaky breath before leaning into the microphone to address the silent crowd. "Gemma was the absolute light of my life," Declan said, his voice echoing through the captivated ballroom. His tone was a masterful, calculated blend of heartbreak and resilience. She was my anchor, my brilliant partner, and my best friend. In this world, the past 2 days have been an absolute waking nightmare. The local authorities are doing everything they can to search the river behind our home, but the harsh reality of this tragic accident is beginning to set in. I shifted my gaze to the front row of VIP tables. Beverly and Harrison sat front and center, wearing expressions of profound, manufactured grief. Beverly dabbed delicately at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, leaning heavily into Harrison for performative support. Sloane sat beside them, holding her brother gaze with a look of perfect sisterly solidarity. They were basking in the overwhelming sympathy of the elite crowd, relishing the attention and the tragic narrative that would soon shield them from any impending financial scrutiny. My wife was incredibly proud of the diligent work we do here at the firm, Declan continued, actually producing a single solitary tear that rolled flawlessly down his cheek. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, a gesture of raw vulnerability that had several wealthy women in the audience tearing up in response. She understood that protecting your hard-earned investments, securing your family legacies, and building a firm foundation of trust is the most important work in the world. She would want us to celebrate that tonight. She would want me to stand up here and be strong for all of you. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his lies made my blood run freezing cold. He was standing in front of the very people he was actively robbing, using my supposed tragic death to reinforce their blind trust in his fraudulent empire. He was capitalizing on a murder he orchestrated to keep the money flowing into his sinking ship. I placed my hand flat against the cool brass handle of the heavy oak door. The time for hiding in cheap motels was completely over. The time for letting these arrogant parasites dictate my worth or threaten my life was finished. I took one final deep breath, letting the cool, conditioned air fill my lungs, and pushed the heavy wooden doors violently open. The thick oak panels swung outward with a loud, resounding thud that echoed sharply off the ballroom walls. The sudden noise instantly drew the attention of the waitstaff, lingering near the back of the room, followed quickly by the guests seated at the rear tables. I stepped confidently through the threshold and into the bright, ambient light of the ballroom. The striking, unapologetic crimson red of my tailored silk gown contrasted violently against the sea of conservative black tuxedos and dark evening dresses. I held my head high, my shoulders squared, and my expression carved from absolute ice. I did not rush. I walked slowly and deliberately down the center aisle, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. The reaction in the room rippled forward like a seismic shockwave. Conversations abruptly died in the throats of the attendees. Champagne glasses were lowered to the tables with shaking hands. Heads turned, eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated horror and disbelief. Sharp gasps erupted from the tables as the wealthy investors recognized the face of the woman currently being mourned on the giant screen above the stage. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the stage. Declan was still gripping the podium, frozen mid-sentence. His pale blue eyes locked onto my crimson dress, expanding until they were practically bulging out of his skull. All the artificial color drained instantly from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified, panicked corpse. In the front row, Beverly dropped her lace handkerchief onto her plate. Harrison let out a loud, strangled gasp, gripping the edge of the tablecloth so hard his knuckles turned stark white. Sloane sat completely paralyzed, her mouth hanging open in sheer terror. The entire grand ballroom went dead silent. The only sound in the massive, opulent space was the steady, unrelenting click of my heels as I closed the distance between the back of the room and the brilliantly lit stage. Declan took a trembling step backward. His hand went entirely limp. The heavy wireless microphone slipped from his sweating fingers and plummeted toward the hardwood floor. It struck the wooden boards with a violent, explosive crack. A high-pitched, deafening screech of audio feedback ripped through the grand ballroom. Several guests in the front rows flinched, covering their ears against the piercing sound, but their eyes remained absolutely glued to my approaching figure. The feedback faded into a thick, suffocating silence. I kept walking. I did not look at the tech executives whispering frantically to their spouses. I did not look at the real estate moguls pulling out smartphones to record the unbelievable spectacle unfolding. My gaze was fixed entirely on the man who had planned to slaughter me for a $5 million cash payout. The golden boy of Seattle wealth management was currently shrinking under the blinding stage lights. His broad shoulders collapsed. His perfectly tailored suit suddenly looked far too large for his shaking frame. He was watching a ghost approach, a ghost draped in brilliant, undeniable crimson silk. As I reached the front row of tables, I finally allowed my eyes to flick toward my in-laws. Beverly had pressed both her hands over her mouth, her face drained of all color, looking like a woman who had just seen a terrifying apparition. Harrison was completely frozen, his expensive imported cigar slipping from his fingers to burn a hole directly through the fine linen tablecloth. Sloane was actively shaking, her eyes darting desperately toward the nearest exit. They knew. The sheer, terrifying realization that their entire criminal conspiracy was walking right toward them paralyzed them in their seats. They were completely trapped in their own VIP section. I reached the edge of the stage. A young, frantic event planner wearing a headset and holding a backup microphone rushed forward from the wings. She was gesturing wildly, trying to understand how a deceased woman had just walked into her own memorial service. I did not give her a chance to speak. I reached out and firmly took the backup microphone directly from her trembling hands. She surrendered it without a fight, stepping back into the shadows. I turned to face the hundreds of elite clients gathered in the ballroom. I stood tall, letting the red silk of my gown catch the bright glare of the stage lights. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice was completely steady, icy cold, and resonating with absolute authority. "Thank you for the beautiful eulogy, Declan," I said, the sound echoing flawlessly off the high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. It was a truly magnificent performance. Declan opened his mouth, trying to formulate words, but only a pathetic, raspy breath escaped his lungs. He looked wildly toward the exit doors, the primal instinct of a cornered animal screaming at him to flee. But he was surrounded by hundreds of the most powerful people in the city. There was absolutely nowhere left to hide. I turned my body slightly, addressing the vast sea of confused, shocked faces in the audience. "You are all gathered here tonight to mourn the tragic, accidental death of a devoted wife." I continued, pacing slowly across the front edge of the stage. "You are invited here to offer your deep sympathies and your unwavering support to a man who handles your retirement funds, your college accounts, and your family trusts. He wanted your pity, but more importantly, he wanted your blind and continued trust." A low murmur began to ripple through the crowd. I could see the sharpest minds in the room beginning to connect the dots. The confusion on their faces was slowly morphing into a dark, creeping suspicion. They were wealthy, intelligent investors, and they understood that an orchestrated fake death was never about romance or tragedy. It was always about money. "However," I said, raising my voice slightly to cut through the growing whispers, "I think you would all much rather hear the truth about your missing money." The murmurs instantly stopped. The entire ballroom fell into a deadly, electrified silence. The word "missing" hung in the air like a live grenade. Wealthy people can tolerate a scandal. They can tolerate a dramatic family feud. But they will absolutely not tolerate a threat to their capital. I saw CEOs sit up entirely straight, their postures shifting from shocked spectators to aggressive predators. I saw surgeons narrow their eyes, turning their fierce attention directly onto Declan. Declan frantically lunged forward, throwing his hands out in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Gemma, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch. "Do not do this. We can talk about this. I can explain everything. Please, you do not understand." I stepped back, maintaining my distance, my eyes locked on his terrified face. "I understand perfectly, Declan. I understand hidden offshore banking accounts. I understand dummy shell corporations perfectly. And I intimately understand the exact mechanics of a massive bleeding Ponzi scheme. I did not need to say anything else. I simply raised my free hand and gave a sharp, subtle nod toward the dark tinted glass of the audiovisual control booth positioned high above the back of the ballroom. Up in the booth, my brilliant sister-in-law Nia executed the final, fatal command. She completely overrode the hotel video projection system. The massive, tasteful photograph of my smiling face on the giant screen behind Declan abruptly vanished. The screen flickered black for a fraction of a second before exploding into a blinding, high-definition display of raw financial data. Nia projected the hidden offshore Cayman Islands bank accounts directly onto the huge 40-foot screen for the entire ballroom to see. The display was staggering and undeniable. Spreadsheets, wire transfer logs, and private client ledgers stretched across the massive canvas. But Nia had designed the projection perfectly. She had highlighted the master balance sheet in bold, glowing red text in the absolute dead center of the screen, revealing a catastrophic negative balance of $4.5 million. Gasps rippled through the ballroom as the elite attendees stared at the irrefutable evidence of their evaporating wealth. But Nia was just getting started. The massive display shifted, with a sharp digital sound effect, replacing the offshore bank ledgers with a highly magnified crystal-clear image of a legal document. It was the accelerated term life insurance policy. My signature was perfectly visible at the bottom right, next to the staggering coverage amount of $5 million. Beside the policy, a massive red arrow pointed directly to the listed beneficiary, Horizon Harbor Trust, and right below that, the registered agent controlling the phantom account was revealed in massive, undeniable letters. Sloan. The audience inhaled a collective, horrified breath. They were looking at the precise mathematical formula for my execution. $4.5 million stolen from their retirement accounts, balanced perfectly against a $5 million bounty on my head. Declan stood paralyzed on the stage, his mouth opening and closing silently as the undeniable proof of his murderous desperation bathed him in a harsh, glaring light. Then came the final, devastating blow. The screen fractured into multiple panels, bringing up high-definition screenshots of the recovered text messages. The group chat labeled "Family Business" loomed over the crowd. Nia highlighted the most damning exchanges in bright yellow, forcing every single person in the room to read the unfiltered cruelty of the people they had trusted with their life savings. The messages flashed in rapid succession. Harrison demanding cash to prevent his country club suspension. Sloan obsessing over the exact date the trust fund money would clear for her luxury real estate purchase. The ballroom descended into an eerie, suffocated silence as the final message appeared on the massive screen. It was Beverly, issuing the ultimate, chilling command to her son. "Make sure the cliff at the villa is high enough. I do not want to pay her medical bills if she only ends up paralyzed. Do it right." The silence held for exactly 2 seconds before the entire room detonated. The sophisticated, polite atmosphere of the wealth management gala evaporated into pure, unadulterated chaos. The realization that they had been systematically robbed by a man who was actively plotting to slaughter his own wife sent the ultra-wealthy guests into an absolute frenzy. A tech billionaire in the third row stood up and violently kicked his chair backward, pointing a shaking finger directly at Declan. "You stole my children's college fund!" he roared, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Give me my money back right now!" That single shout acted as a match dropped into a powder keg. Dozens of furious clients surged forward, abandoning their tables and rushing the stage. They screamed at Declan, demanding answers, threatening lawsuits, and demanding the immediate return of their stolen capital. The private security guards hired for the event rushed into the aisles, forming a desperate human barricade to prevent the furious mob from physically tearing my husband apart. Down in the front row, the fake aristocratic facade of my in-laws shattered into a million jagged pieces. The overwhelming pressure of public exposure and impending financial ruin stripped away their polished manners, revealing the feral, desperate animals hiding underneath. Harrison jumped out of his chair, completely abandoning his performative grief. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at his own son. "I had nothing to do with this," Harrison screamed over the deafening noise of the crowd throwing Declan under the bus without a second thought. "He handled all the money. I never looked at the books. I am a victim here too." Sloane scrambled away from the table, her face contorted in sheer terror as the angry investors turned their fierce attention toward the VIP section. She backed into a floral arrangement, knocking it to the floor. I did not know what the trust fund was for. She shrieked, tears of genuine panic streaming down her face. "Declan just told me to sign the paperwork. He used my name. It was all his idea. He is the one who wanted her dead, not me." She pointed frantically at her brother, desperately trying to sever her connection to the murder plot. Beverly, the proud matriarch who had commanded me to die on a jagged cliff just to save her designer wardrobe, completely unraveled. She grabbed Harrison by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, physically shaking him. "You promised me we were safe!" Beverly shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. "You told me the boy had it under control. This is your fault for losing our money in the first place." Harrison shoved her hands away forcefully, his face purple with rage. "Shut your mouth, Beverly. Your text message is up on that screen. You told him to kill her." They were violently tearing each other to pieces, sacrificing their own flesh and blood to save themselves. The luxurious, impenetrable family unit had disintegrated the absolute moment their money and status disappeared. I stood my ground at the edge of the stage, wrapped in my crimson silk gown, watching the total destruction of the people who had treated me like disposable garbage. I felt absolutely nothing for them. No pity, no remorse, just the cold, satisfying finality of a perfectly executed audit. Declan finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He looked at his family turning against him. He looked at the furious mob of clients demanding his head, and then his pale, bloodshot eyes locked onto me. He realized his entire life was completely over, and he blamed me for the destruction. A primal, guttural roar erupted from his chest. His face contorted into a mask of pure, murderous hatred. He leaped off the edge of the stage, his hands outstretched, lunging directly toward my throat. He was going to kill me, right there in front of hundreds of witnesses. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still. Before Declan could even brush the fabric of my dress, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open with explosive force. A booming, authoritative voice echoed over the deafening chaos of the crowd. "Federal agents, nobody move." Dozens of armed men and women wearing dark tactical gear swarmed into the grand ballroom. The bold yellow letters FBI and SEC were emblazoned across their tactical vests. Nia had not just formats a presentation. Hours ago, she had anonymously routed the entire unencrypted cache of offshore ledgers, the forged insurance documents, and the murder conspiracy text messages directly to the Federal Cybercrimes Division. They had been waiting in the lobby for the signal. The ultimate trap had completely snapped shut. Two federal agents intercepted Declan mid-air before his hands could even reach my throat. The impact was brutal and absolute. They slammed my husband face first onto the polished marble floor of the ballroom with a force that shook the front row tables. The sickening crunch of his nose breaking echoed clearly over the screaming crowd. A heavy tactical boot pressed firmly between his shoulder blades, pinning him down to the ground, as cold steel handcuffs were violently ratcheted onto his wrists. Declan thrashed and roared like a wild animal, screaming my name in a mix of fury and disbelief. He was completely stripped of his tailored elegance, transformed into a pathetic, desperate criminal who finally realized he had lost. In the front row, the aristocratic facade of his family reached its final, pathetic conclusion. Beverly let out a piercing, theatrical shriek and dramatically fainted. But without her stolen wealth to protect her, not a single person in the room stepped forward to catch her. She hit the floor in a heap of expensive silk and fake pearls, her designer handbag spilling across the carpet. Harrison, the man who had happily gambled away the life savings of innocent families, tried to make a cowardly dash for the side exit doors. He did not make it 5 steps before a massive SEC agent tackled him hard against a dessert table, sending crystal glasses and champagne flutes shattering to the ground. Sloane was backed into a corner by 2 female FBI agents. She was crying hysterically, her expensive makeup running down her face, begging for mercy, and eagerly offering to testify against her own parents as the agents aggressively read her Miranda rights. I stood at the edge of the stage in my crimson gown, completely untouched. I watched the chaotic, satisfying destruction of the monsters who had actively planned to push me off a cliff. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt the profound, overwhelming warmth of pure justice. Fast forward exactly 6 months. The legal and financial fallout was swift, merciless, and utterly absolute. The criminal trial barely lasted a full week. Because of the pristine, undeniable digital evidence Nia had pulled from his deleted cloud backups, combined with my rigorous forensic accounting reports, Declan stood absolutely no chance in front of a jury. The defense attorneys could not spin a single lie to protect him. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before delivering a guilty verdict on all counts. My former husband is currently serving a life sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. He was convicted of massive corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit premeditated murder. The untouchable golden boy of Seattle wealth management now wears a standard-issue orange jumpsuit and spends 23 hours a day locked inside a tiny, bleak concrete cell. His toxic family shared his exact fate. Beverly, Harrison, and Sloane were all arrested and charged for active accomplice liability and criminal conspiracy. The federal government mercilessly seized every single asset they owned. The luxury downtown condominium, the exclusive country club memberships, the expensive imported vehicles, and the designer wardrobes were all instantly liquidated by the state to pay for restitution. They were forced into total, humiliating bankruptcy before being handed lengthy federal prison sentences of their own. The elite, high society friends they had spent years trying to impress abandoned them the very second the handcuffs clicked. They lost their money, their freedom, and their precious social status all in one single night. They have absolutely nothing left. As for the victims of Declan's massive Ponzi scheme, I made sure they were made entirely whole. I worked directly alongside the SEC and the FBI for weeks, using my intimate knowledge of forensic accounting to meticulously untangle his chaotic web of offshore shell corporations. Because of my relentless dedication, the authorities successfully recovered the stolen millions hidden across international borders. Every single swindled client was refunded their hard-earned money. In return for my extensive cooperation and my vital role as the primary whistleblower, the court granted me total legal control over the remaining unsoiled marital assets. I walked away with exactly what I legally deserved, completely free of debt and completely free of the dangerous parasite I had once called a husband. The very first thing I did with my newfound freedom and financial security was secure a beautiful future for the only family member who truly mattered. I bought my grandmother Irene a stunning, sprawling house right on the rugged Washington coast. It features massive wraparound windows where she can sit comfortably, drink her tea, and listen to the crashing ocean waves. The in-laws used to mock her and call her a crazy old bat, but her sharp intuition is the sole reason I am alive and thriving today. She now lives in total luxury and absolute peace, far away from anyone who would ever dare to doubt her brilliant instincts. I did not return to my old corporate accounting job. I had discovered a far more thrilling and lucrative use for my specific set of skills. Leonia and I pooled our resources and officially opened our own elite private investigation firm in downtown Seattle. We combined my forensic accounting expertise with Nia's unmatched cybersecurity genius and Leo's tactical logistics management. Today, our firm specializes exclusively in tracking hidden offshore assets, exposing corrupt corporate executives, and completely destroying the pristine, fake facades of the criminal elite. We hunt the exact kind of financial predators that Declan tried to be. And business is absolutely booming. Looking back at the woman who stood in that dark home office, terrified and shaking with a flashlight in her hand, I barely recognize her. I had spent 5 years making myself small, wearing sensible clothes and hiding my own brilliance just to protect the fragile ego of a dangerous, greedy man. I had allowed toxic people to dictate my worth and mock my very existence. But the moment they tried to end my life for a paycheck, they accidentally ignited a blazing fire that burned their entire empire to ashes. When toxic people try to bury you, remember you are a seed. Grow up and shatter their concrete. Have you ever been betrayed by the people you trusted the most? How did you find the ultimate strength to fight back and reclaim your life? Share your stories of survival and triumph in the comments section below. I read every single one of them. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of resilience, justice, and ultimate revenge. Remember that no matter how dark or terrifying the situation seems, you always have the power to write your own final chapter. Thank you so much for watching, and stay strong.